I've been in a series that I just started last week called Keys to Restoration. Keys to Restoration, or Keys to Healing. And I want you to understand, I'm not going to talk about healing in the sense of physical healing, the healing of the body, because I know that if you follow my channel, you know that I talk about healing a lot. In fact, I just finished up a series on healing. And so you know that I talk about that a lot. But today I need to talk to you about how to be restored and healed in other aspects, in other areas of your life. How does God heal businesses? How to be healed in your church? How to be healed in your relationships? How to be restored? How is it that we can be restored? And what are the keys to that restoration? Now, in the last video, we started basing this off of a prophetic word that I gave in 2016, in which I said that we were going to enter into a season of conflict. And I warned us that we should be careful in this season to know that there was going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of conflict. And I wanted us to understand that the conflict has a purpose. And that purpose is to expose things that are threatening us and threatening our greatness, threatening our ability to be everything that we can be. And I also said that the goal of that conflict and the goal of it, God exposing things that are hidden in the fabric of a business or a fabric of a marriage or the fabric of a nation or the fabric of America. The whole point of the exposing is so that we could see the things that keep us from being everything that we could be, and so that he could heal us or restore us. And it's important that we understand that God has been doing surgery on us for the last 4 years. And it's intentional. All of the stuff that you see, God is not surprised by the things that are happening. The things that are happening are there to help us see how to do things better. Even COVID-19, even though it is extremely, extremely inconvenient, it is going to help us learn how to do things differently and better. And the world is changing and being shaped by this experience. And let me say this. Those who are wise among you, pay attention. Those who are wise need to pay attention. Because if you're not paying attention, then you're going to get crushed in this moment. But this moment is a time to see clearly how to go another way or do things differently so that we can be restored. Your business does not have to go down. You have to learn how to handle the conflicts. And so that's what we've been talking about, how to handle the conflicts. And we've been looking at a man named Naaman's life, because Naaman's story in 2 Kings 5 teaches us a lot about conflict. And God used it to prophetically open up the word to me so that I could see how to. I use these principles all the time. How do we deal with conflict? How do we allow ourselves to dwell in the midst of conflict? Jesus said, in this world there will be trouble. It's not going anywhere. So what do we do with it? How can we use it to our benefit? That's what I'm talking about. Is how do we use it to our benefit? And how do we get restored? How do we allow ourselves to move through the process so that we are healed and not destroyed by the conflicts in our lives? And Naaman's story teaches us that it's riddled with conflict. Number one, it's just conflict on multiple levels. There's theological conflict, there's relationship conflict, there's conflict in the nature. It's just conflict. It's conflict on multiple levels. And in the midst of it, we learn how to deal with conflict and how to be restored. Now, again, I wrote a book based on the prophecy that God gave me to help us get through the season. So I said what was going to happen. Then God gave me a book to help us know how to respond in that season. It's called Undefiled Greatness. Undefiled Greatness. And if you get a hold of it, it will better help you know how to apply the truth in the book to the situations that are happening now so that you come out better on the end of this and not worse. Because again, God's goal is restoration and healing and making us the best version of ourselves. And we talked about the first key to restoration. And we said that the first key of restoration was learning how to deal with the but in the story. And so Naaman's story starts out like this. It says, now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. Now I want us to understand what's happening here. I want us to look at this in some other terms. Let's look at this in terms of looking at Naaman's resume. Let's look at it as if it were a resume. So here the Bible tells us that this man is a military commander. He's favored by the president. He has favor with God, and he's a mighty man. He's a military commander. He's favored by the president. He has favor with God, and he is a mighty warrior. It takes the time to list out a very impressive resume, and then it turns around and defiles it or puts a blemish on it by saying, but he was a leper. And I want you to know that's where we started with last week. We started with understanding that there is a but in your story, and that but is a blemish on your greatness. That God has made you great, and God has given you the potential to have the best marriage you can have. God has given you the potential to have the best business that you can have. God has given you the potential to be the best manager you can be. God has given America the opportunity to be the best country that it can be. But, and there is a but in everybody's story. Naaman's but was that he was a leper. Again, leprosy is a disease that causes discoloration in the affected area of the body. It can be so extreme that it causes the area that's affected to rot, and to rot to such a degree that the area that affected, let's say per se the hand, will literally rot and fall off of the body. It is a serious condition. Now, Naaman has all of these great and awesome accomplishments in his life, but he also has this blemish on his greatness, and everybody can see it. And so I wanted to know last week, are you woman or man enough to face the but? I want us to look at some important moments within this text. So we've already looked at verse 1 where it talks about Naaman was a leper, but the next important moment that happens in the passage is verse 11. And it says this, but Naaman became furious and went away and said, indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy. This is an important passage as well. And you know why? Because at this point, Naaman has received everything he needs to stand before the healing opportunity that God has granted him. And there is another but in his story. And so that's what I want us to understand, is that there is a but in your story. There's a but in the first one. There's a but on your greatness, but then there's another but in your story. And this but, y'all, stands between him and the next important moment in the story. So what's the next important moment in the story? Verse 14. Let's read it. So he went down and dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. So Naaman got healed. But Naaman was unable to experience the healing until he got past the first 2 buts in his story. So we have to deal with the buts in our story if we're going to be healed. And I said the first thing that we had to do was we had to deal with the first key, which is the key of acceptance. You have to be able to acknowledge that there is a but in your story. You have to be able to acknowledge the but in your story. Otherwise, you'll never get to the verse 14s of your life. You'll never see restoration. You'll never see healing if you're not going to be brave enough to deal with the but. So the question is, why don't we deal with the buts in our stories? Why don't we deal with the buts in our stories? There are 3 things, and hopefully I can get through this in this segment of time. If not, of course, this will be a part 2. But there are 3 things that keep us from dealing with the but in our story. The first thing that keeps us from dealing with the but in our story is our attitude. It's our attitude. It's our attitude about the but. I'm going to look at Naaman's verse one more time. Verse 1. Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was great and honorable in the eyes of his master. Because of him, the Lord had given victory to Syria. Now watch what this part of the passage says. It says, he was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. I want you to know that being able to see that part of the story correctly is important, because so many of us are affected by not being able to get rid of the but in our story. And so many of us are afraid to confront the but in our story because we don't see it as a but, we see it as an even though. We say Naaman was a military commander and favored by the president and favored by God, a mighty man of God, even though he was a leper. And I think that is one of the problems that we have in our nation, at least in America, is it's easy for us to look at our successes and discount the problem in our life because we have an even though mentality and not a but mentality. You see, even though excuses everything else, even though says I can be racist and I can be a multimillionaire, a billionaire in a corporation. Even though says I can be the pastor of a church and be successful, even though I still touch little kids. Even though this excuses our behavior. And so Naaman does not have an even though mentality. Yes, he was a great military commander. Yes, he was favored by God. Yes, he was a great and mighty warrior. It says, but he was a leper. Not even though he was a leper. And I need you to ask yourself, where am I putting the even those in my life? Am I patting myself on the back for all of the accomplishments of my life and using the even though to excuse the areas of my life that I'm not man or woman enough to confront? That's what we have to consider. Our attitude about the but. Are you seeing it as a but or an even though? Even though allows us to excuse it. But has a canceling power. It's kind of like when somebody says, when they come to apologize to you and they say, I know that I hurt your feelings. And then they say, but. When you hear the but, you're offended by the but, because the word but has the power to cancel the statement that came prior to it. And what it does is it gives more weight to the thing on the other side of the but, so that you feel offended because you realize they're discounting the issue. And so here the word but discounts all of Naaman's accomplishments. And it teaches us that it is a blemish, an unwanted mark, an unwanted way of being viewed. And this is important to the story, because the only thing that drives Naaman to get healed is the fact that he does not have an even though mentality, but a but mentality. In America, you will not experience healing as long as you can say we are powerful and wealthy, even though there's racism among us. We are powerful and wealthy, even though there's brutality in our police ranks. We will not be able to accomplish that greatness. Black America will not be able to accomplish that greatness unless we deal with the but in our story. We got to stop saying even though, and we got to see the but for the but, so that we can have the drive to move toward the healing that God has for us. So that is the first thing that gets in our way. The next thing that gets in the way of our ability to see the but in our story is our inability to comprehend the impact of the problem. Now, we're going to really look at this. This is going to be important. Our inability to comprehend how the issue in our lives impacts other people is the second hindrance to us being able to see that but in the story the way it should be viewed. Read at verse 2. Well, we've read verse 1 several times, but I'm going to put it back on the screen so we can see it, because I want you to see the title of the screen says the personal problem. The personal problem. This is when the verse introduces us to Naaman, and it's his problem. And some of the problems that we have in life are simply because we see whatever the problem that's happening in our life, our alcoholism, our drug addiction, our sexual promiscuity, our racism, we see these things as personal problems. But watch this. Let's go to verse 2 and 3. Let's read it. And the Syrians had gone on raids and brought back a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, if only my master were with the prophet who was in Samaria, for he would heal the leprosy. Now look at this. It's Naaman's problem in verse 1. It's Naaman's problem in verse 1. And then when we get to verse 2 and 3, his wife is having a conversation with his slave girl about Naaman's problem. Naaman's problem is not only Naaman's problem. Naaman's problem is now a domestic problem. It's in his house. And let me tell you how I know that it's a problem that they're talking about. because they're talking about him being healed from it. So it's not something that they were willing to accept. They weren't willing to accept the alcoholism. They weren't willing to accept the drug addiction. They weren't willing to accept the running around with different men or running around with different women. They weren't willing to accept this thing that was in his life, because it was affecting their life. You have to deal with the but in your story, because the personal problem or the challenge or the anger or the rage or the problems that you have, they have an impact on the loved ones in your life. So not only, y'all, watch this. Watch this. Let's go on to the next one. It's not only a domestic problem. Watch this. And Naaman, verse 4, and Naaman went in and told his master, saying, thus and thus says the girl who is from the land of Israel. Then the king of Samaria said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Now he has now gone to the king with his problem, and it becomes the nation's problem. His problem is now the nation's problem. And watch this. It says, watch this. You go back to the verse. Look at what he gave Naaman. He gave him 10 talents of silver, 6 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. The government is spending its resources on Naaman's problem. The government is spending its resources on Naaman's problem. Don't tell me that governments are not supposed to be involved. But let me say this about this. There was a reason the government got involved in Naaman's problem. Look at his resume. There was a value assessed in Naaman. He was worth the investment. And let me say that the governments of the world have to be willing to see the value of investing in their soldiers, the value of investing in their communities, the value of investing in people's lives. Naaman's problem is not Naaman's problem. It's his family's problem. It's his nation's problem. Watch this. Let's go on a little further. It is an international problem. Watch this. Verse 6. Then he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which said, now be advised when this letter comes to you that I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy. And it happened when the king of Israel read the letter that he tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy? Therefore, please consider and see how he seeks a quarrel with me. Look at this. So the king of Syria sends Naaman and his leprosy to the king of Israel. It becomes an international problem. It becomes an international problem. Let's go a little deeper. Look at what happens in verse 8. So it was when Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Syria had torn his clothes, that he sent to the king saying, why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So it goes from being a personal problem to a domestic problem, to a national problem, to an international problem, to being God's problem. It becomes a problem that God says, I'm going to fix this problem. Your problem, whatever it is, great or small, Whatever it is that's keeping you from advancing in your career, whatever it is that's keeping your marriage from becoming everything it can be, whatever it is that's keeping America from being great, whatever it is that's keeping your business from thriving, whatever it is, God cares about the problem. But I need us to understand something very, very important. It does not rise to the level of being God's problem until there is first unity about the issue. Oh, we're going to let that one sit in right there. It doesn't rise to the level of becoming God's problem until it first becomes a community issue. Look at this. Naaman wanted to be healed. The slave girl and the wife were talking because they wanted Naaman healed. The king sent him with the resources. The king wanted Naaman healed. The Israeli king sent him to Elijah because he couldn't do it, but he wanted him healed. Elijah wanted him healed. If we read further down into the story, Elijah, when he gets to the second button, he turns and walks away from the opportunity that God has given him. His servants challenge him and say, Master, if the man had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? His servants wanted him healed. Everybody wanted Naaman healed. That's what we see happening right now in the world, is the problems that start in America are now blossoming into the world. And we're starting to see that it's not a problem for African Americans, and it's not just a problem in Minneapolis, and it's not just a problem in these local places, but these problems are beginning to spread around the world, and people are catching wind, and everybody together is saying, we want to see healing and restoration. And I want to let you know that is when we get to the place of recognizing as a community, when we can agree on the problems that exist in our community, when we can agree on the problems that exist in our home, when we can agree on the problems that exist in our church, when we can agree on the problems that exist in our business, when we can agree on the problems that exist in our governments, that's when we get God's attention. We get his attention by dealing with the but in the story. And one of the reasons we can't deal with the but in our story is because we're unwilling to comprehend the impact of our seemingly personal problem. But then there's a third thing. The last thing that keeps us from being able to view the but in our story with a sense of urgency, the thing that lets us turn it into an even though instead of a but, is our inability to see how the problem robs us of our future. Our inability to see how the problem robs us of our future. One of the things that drove Naaman to the place of seeking the restoration was that but in his story. And it was because that but threatened his ability to leave a legacy in the earth. Let's look at his status again. He had a lot to lose. Had a military career, a successful military career. He had affluence, meaning he had access to wealth. We know this because when he brought his problem to the king, first of all, he could go to the king. And then he brought his problem to the king, and the king freely shared his resources. His affluence was in jeopardy. His influence was in jeopardy. his favor with God. His strength was in jeopardy. How can he be a mighty warrior with this but in his life bringing him down? And it means this: leprosy threatened Naaman's future. The question is this: what is threatening yours? What is threatening your future? Is it one of the isms? Is it racism or alcoholism? Is it prejudicial biases? Is it drug abuse? Is it whoring? Is it partisan politics? Is it slothfulness? Is it meanness? Is it pride? Is it stubbornness? Is it depression? Is it narcissism? Is it impulsiveness? Is it financial ignorance? Is it a lacking education? What but is threatening the future of your story? And will you view it with the right attitude? Will you comprehend the impact that it has on everything around you? And will you acknowledge that it's threatening your future? I wonder what you could be if that but wasn't there. Because one of the things about the story that we love to preach is that Naaman was healed. Naaman was restored. God got rid of the but in Naaman's resume, and now it doesn't say but he was a leper. Wouldn't you love for your life story to not have a but in it? If you're going to be have such a life, then you have to accept that there is a but in your story. You have to look at it with the right attitude. You have to comprehend the impact it has on your life. And finally, you have to realize that it is threatening your future.